Hey guys, welcome back here to today's episode of Intuitive Angling, and appreciate you guys swinging by the channel today to check the video out. And guys, today I want to have a comprehensive discussion on braided line and fluorocarbon line. As far as the situations you need to use both of these in, I see a lot of people making mistakes using braid when they shouldn't, using fluorocarbon when they shouldn't, using the different and wrong pound test lines for both. So we're going to have a really in-depth conversation just in general about fishing lines, these two types, the two most popular types in today's video. I think it's definitely going to help you guys land a lot more fish and get a lot more bites as a result too. Also guys, we're going to be talking about the line I've been using for 25, almost 30 years, Seaguar. They got the new Carbon Ultra fluorocarbon. I use the Carbon Ultra and the Seaguar InvisX. And then the Smackdown braid, guys. So I'll link both of these in my Tackle Warehouse link in the description of this video. If you guys would like to get some really, really good line, Seaguar just, sets the bar for all companies on line making. They're absolutely awesome. Probably the first company that ever made fluorocarbon. So anyway, link in the description. And one final thing, guys, real quick here. I have been using this Baitpop, guys, for the last 4 or 5 months. And the last 2 tournaments, guys, that I used it not only on my crankbait when I won the Solo Pro series at Lake of the Ozarks, but I used it on all my soft plastics and jigs when I got 5th place last weekend at Truman Lake in the BFL up there. This is freaking awesome, guys. It's got real fish scent in it, or real fish parts. It's got amino acids. It comes in different glitter flavors, different colors. Really easy, just put it right on your finger and just put it on your bait. It stays for a long time. So I'll put the Baitpop link also in my Tackle Warehouse link in the description of this video. If you guys would like to try a tube out, you guys will really see a difference in your fishing, so appreciate that. Okay guys, let's have this conversation on line. This is gonna be a pretty in-depth conversation here. Line is probably one of the most underrated aspects about bass fishing in terms of things that'll get you more strikes and land more fish, because based upon a lot of different characteristics of line, it's going to determine the action of your lure. It's going to determine the rate of fall of your lure. It's going to determine, how you play a fish and if you can get a fish out of cover. There's a lot of variables when you're talking about fishing line. It's not just one thing over another. And there's sort of like, it's complex. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. There's this what I'm getting ready to tell you is maybe a little bit confusing. I'm gonna try to simplify it as much as I can, but I'm just giving you my experience about using fishing line for over 50 years and using fluorocarbon and braid now for 30 years, what I like to do with it. Okay, first of all, one of the big overriding themes of everything when you're talking about fishing line is you're wanting to maximize your strikes, and you want to maximize your fish losses based upon fish breaking off. So you have 2 main concerns. Number one is you have the concern about generating the strike, using the right line to generate the strike, breaking off, and actually hooking the fish. So there's actually 3 things there, and all 3 of these are just as important, because based upon the type and size of line that you use, it's going to directly affect how many bites you get. And the reason that is for a couple different reasons. Number one, the visibility aspect of it. Obviously, braided line is more visible than fluorocarbon, so you got that consideration that the fish can see the braided line in the water, and they can see fluorocarbon to some extent too, even though it's clear. I mean, depending upon the pound to test line. And then also the line itself, as far as the characteristics of the stretch or not stretch, has a lot to do with your ability to hook the fish. Braided line has no stretch in it. That is the characteristic of braided line. It can be an advantage and it can be a disadvantage. Fluorocarbon has some stretch into it. It doesn't have as much stretch as monofilament, but it still has stretch to it. So if you put monofilament and fluorocarbon as far as the stretch ratio, fluorocarbon has about probably 25% less stretch than monofilament, and again, braid doesn't have any stretch at all. Now, when you're talking about stretch, let's sort of go through the whole 9 yards as far as the stretch part of it, generating strikes, and then the breaking the fish off. Let's start out a little bit with the stretch on it. The times that you do not want any stretch, where you want to use braided line, is when you're talking about maximum power and hook penetration. So this is going to be relegated with a couple different type of techniques. The main technique, as far as where a braided line is going to help you more than anything else, is fishing some type of a topwater frog or toad in real thick vegetation. Now, I do use braided line in this situation here all the time, because if you're fishing a frog, and I don't use it if I'm fishing open water, because I do fish like a frog, like underneath overhanging trees and that type of stuff. But if I'm fishing matted vegetation like lily pad fields, matted hydrilla or milfoil, any type of matted vegetation, you always want to use braided line, because of just the fact that those fish are going to take you down in that vegetation. They can't see the line because it's sitting on top of the vegetation, so there's no really reason to do it. So in that situation, you're looking for the maximum power, because you got to drag those fish out of those grass beds a lot of time, and you got to get the hook in, a frog or toad, which usually has a big hook in it. One piece of advice I will give you guys, though, if you're using braided line frog fishing, is don't go with a real heavy rod, because you don't need it. Since there's no stretch in the braided line, you want to use a rod that sort of has like some type of more of a medium action, maybe slightly fast a little bit, but you don't want to use a rod that has a real stiff tip on it, because that's too much power. If you don't have any give in the rod tip and you don't have any give in the line, a lot of times you're going to tear that bait out of the fish's mouth, or you're going to rip the fish's mouth if it's hooked in the soft part of it. So when you're using braided line, I usually go to like some type of rod over 7 feet long that has a little bit softer tip on it, a little bit more bend in it, because also you're going to be able to get the hook in them real good like that. And especially once you do get the hook in them, it allows you to fight the fish a little bit better. So that's one aspect that you have to consider with that. The other thing with that is some baits, when the fish hit it, you want the stretch. Prime example would be a crankbait, because like on a crankbait, when that crankbait's wobbling through the water like this, a lot of times the fish will swim up behind that crankbait and they'll flare their gills and they inhale the crankbait backwards. So something's got to give. That has got to either give from your line stretch or a little bit softer tip rod, or a combination of both. So if you're fishing a reaction bait, you want that stretch that comes with fluorocarbon. You don't want, the no stretch with the braid. You do need that type of a stretch. Another thing about the stretch of fluorocarbon that will help you out is, especially if you're fishing short casts. Let's say, for example, you're throwing a square bill crankbait around some lay down logs or something like that, where you're fishing that bait pretty fast and the fish hits you with like 10 or 15 feet of line out there. The shorter amount of line that you have between your rod tip and the lure, the less stretch you're going to have. So you want that additional stretch on a short cast. Now, if you're making a super long cast, like say, for example, you're making a really long cast with a big deep diving crankbait, you're going to have a lot more stretch at the end of that cast. So you're going to have to, you're going to have to generate and overcompensate for the stretch in there by making a really hard hook set or using a little bit stiffer rod. But that's two of the main considerations in terms of stretch. Another thing about stretch there, on your hook set, and I talked about this just a second ago, but you don't want to tear the fish's mouth, and you don't want to tear the hook out of the fish's mouth. And a lot of times, this is where, fluorocarbon really comes into play. Now, as far as getting the bites on the thing, this is another aspect of it. Let's talk about, and this is one of my biggest things as far as getting the bites on it. I am in the school of thought that you got to get the bite before you can get the fish in. So therefore, I lean heavily towards fluorocarbon line, because I just I know that you get more bites with fluorocarbon line because it's clear. So in any type of situation where I'm a little bit line sensitive, if the line is in the water, I'm going to be using fluorocarbon line unless the cover is so thick that I can't get around it. Now, let me give you an example. Is if you're fishing some super, super thick flooded vegetation, or super, super thick flooded bushes, or that type of thing, where when you set the hook with fluorocarbon line, the cover is so thick that the fish is immediately going to wrap up around a limb or a branch or a piece of grass. In a situation like that, if the water is not clear, I'm going to be using braided line. I don't like to do it, but it's a trade-off, because let's say, for example, if you're flipping 25-pound test fluorocarbon line into some super, super thick mats with a 1-ounce sinker. You simply don't have the power with that stretch to get that fish out, and you don't really need it as far as, the visibility factor if you're in that thick cover. So the two situations that I do use braided line, like for pitching and flipping, are flipping super thick flooded cover, vegetation, that type of thing. Those are the only two times I use braided line, guys. I will use braided line for topwater frog fishing and heavy duty flipping, and that's about it. The only other exception, which is a little bit, it's not a straight braid situation. Sometimes if I'm fishing like a fluke or a floating worm, I'll put like I'll put some 10-pound test braid on, and then I'll put a barrel swivel on the end of the braid, and then like a 2-foot leader of fluorocarbon if I'm fishing that fluke or that floating worm super, super shallow, close to the surface where they can't see the braid, because a lot of times you can make a lot longer casts with that. But anytime that I am fishing deeper, I never use braided line, and that's why I do not use braid to fluorocarbon for any of my spinning applications except that. I use straight fluorocarbon for shaky heads, Ned rigs, wacky rigs, little worms, swim, anything like that. I don't ever use braid to fluorocarbon on that, and that's for another conversation. There's more advantages to using straight fluorocarbon than using braid to fluorocarbon. And I will say one thing about it. Most people that use braid to fluorocarbon, they do so because they see other people doing it or they see pros doing it and they haven't tested it. I spent an entire year testing both braid to fluorocarbon, straight fluorocarbon, and my conclusion after the end of a year of an in-depth practice with this, I am a big advocate of straight fluorocarbon for a lot of different reasons. So that's a big part of it, getting the strike. Now, another thing with your line size and the type of line you're using, braid versus fluorocarbon, is the rate of fall and the action of your lure. The heavier the line is, whether it be fluorocarbon or braided line, the more it's going to affect the action of your lure if it is a lure that wobbles or has some type of action on it with a bill. It's going to affect that action. It's going to take some action away with it. And in addition to doing that, it's also going to, determine the depth that you're fishing at. Fluorocarbon line is a little bit larger diameter than braided line per the pound test. So that's a factor as far as the fall rate of it. And that's another thing that a lot of people don't understand about fishing slow baits like a jig or a Texas rig or something like that. A lot of times the fall rate is so key to getting the strike. And the type of line and the pound test of line that you're using will directly affect the fall rate. For example, if you're using a 3/8 ounce jig with 25-pound test fluorocarbon, when you pitch it out next to a stump or something, it's going to fall one way. But if you put that same 3/8 ounce jig on 10-pound test fluorocarbon, it's going to fall a different way. It's going to fall more in a vertical instead of a horizontal fashion. So the line fall is going to be a big part of it. And then finally, with that, is fighting a fish. Braid is terrible to fight a fish with, simply because you have no stretch, and you can't, the fish, there's no room for error as far as give to a fish when you're fighting it on braid, because there's no, there's no stretch to it. So this is when a lot of people lose fish with braided line, is when they're fighting the fish out in open water simply because it didn't have any give to it. Prime example was my tournament last weekend at Truman Lake, guys. I was mixing it up between 25-pound test Seaguar and Vizex fluorocarbon and 40-pound test Seaguar Smackdown braid. I had the braid on some heavy sinkers, and when the cover was super thick, I'd fish the braid, but I lost a 4-pounder and another really nice fish, probably bigger than that, and I think most of them I lost because I lost them, fighting them, and I think that I just didn't have any stretch with that. So you're going to land a lot more fish with fluorocarbon line versus braided line. So overall, guys, you have to know exactly when and when not to use it. I see a lot of people relying over heavily on braid. You shouldn't ever use braid like on a crankbait. You should never use it on a bait that is going deeper into the water, like if you're fishing a Texas rig worm in 10 foot of water. You don't ever want to use straight braid for that, the visibility factor. But in the course of a year, I'm going to guess probably I bet 95% of my bass fishing is with straight fluorocarbon, and 5% of the time I'm using braided line. That sort of gives you a give and take of it. So anyway, guys, that's just a few things off the top of my head. Like I said, try that Seaguar, guys. You will not be disappointed. I got them in my tackle warehouse links in the description of the video there. I appreciate you guys tuning in. We'll talk later.